In the July of 1991, India started liberalizing its economy, moving away from socialism towards capitalism. The capitalistic world welcomed this move. After all, there was one less socialist country out there in the world, and that is what began the whole idea of India being the next big economy, the big superpower that is going to be. From there on, the Indian economy expanded a whole lot, especially thanks to the IT sector that it has relied on ever since. Between the years 2000 and 2010, the average rate of growth for the Indian economy was close to 7.5%. The only year the growth rate took a dip was the year 2008 when the global recession hit. It is 26 years since 1991 and the liberalization. India has grown a lot but has fallen short of China by a huge margin. So does it mean that India is never going to catch up? Not exactly. With China facing its own issues like China's aging population, growing concern of China's human rights issues, many Western companies are looking for different countries they can set up their bases apart from China. In this video, we break down what are some of the challenges that lie ahead of India if it's ever going to take down China. So let's get started.
The 15th of August, 1947. The British Empire in India has come to an end.
The flag raising and the salute were done amid scenes of the most fantastic rejoicing. And as the flag broke, a brilliant rainbow appeared in the sky, which was taken by the crowd as a good omen.
When India got its independence in 1947, the country was hopeful and the world at the same time was looking at India as to how this country would once again prosper to its former status as a leading economy of the world. I mean, you just have to look back a few hundred years back in 1700s when India was contributing close to 24 to 29% of the world's GDP, which is very similar to what USA and Europe produce in today's day and age. They're a similar contributor to what India was back in 1700s. What really changed for India back in 1700s was its colonization. You see, once the English came on board, India never was the same. It was never the golden bird it was known to be. Considering that this colonization is what had caused this decline in Indian economy, it's quite obvious that once they're leaving, everyone was hopeful that we'll bounce back. However, the reality has been quite different. For the first 40 years or so, India was a socialist country, which didn't allow it to grow a whole bunch. But at the same time, you have to keep in mind, China is still a socialist country. So you can't just blame everything on socialism. Even if you look at the GDP figures from 1990, the GDP of China and India are very closely matched. However, if you move forward to 2021, the picture is quite different. China has a GDP of 17.1 trillion, meanwhile India is close to 3.1. So what went wrong? Even though the liberalization of 1990s helped India a whole bunch, going from $320 billion economy to a 3.1 trillion economy is impressive. But it's not at the same scale as China. Here are the three factors that have held back India, and India needs to find solution to these issues if it's ever going to challenge China, let alone America, as the number one economy of the world. The very first factor is the lack of investment in its own human capital. Let's start with education, which is, you see, India has two educational systems. If you're someone from the upper middle class or just someone who's rich in India, you have the education system, which is perhaps the best in the world. It is the second part of the population, perhaps the bigger chunk of the population, that India has failed. You see, if you're someone from lower middle class or someone who's poor, you have to go to public schools, which are government funded or more like government underfunded. For the rich and the upper middle class, there are private schools with great buildings and teachers. Then there are public schools with miserable buildings. So bad that in many cases, the teachers are forced to teach the kids outside under a tree or something. In one simple sentence, if you are someone who can afford going to a private school, you're golden. But if you are someone who goes to a public school, you're shit out of luck. As simple as that. Now, the reason for this really poor performance on the part of public schools come down to basically the government not funding these schools properly. You see, the public schools in India are funded by the central or the federal government and a state government. However, even collectively, both the center and the state governments have failed to contribute the right amount of money towards improving education throughout India. You see, whenever you make a video that is critical of the policies of a government in India, a whole bunch of internet trolls show up and they'll claim that the data is skewed and I'm using data from a third party or something. So in this video, I've made it a point that I use all the data that has been provided by a government that wants to look good at all times. So the Indian government does a survey of the education system. The idea is this survey should guide the government in making better policy to make education a priority. The first educational survey was done in 1968, followed by 1986, 92, 2015, and the latest one back in 2020. In all of these surveys, it has been concluded that the Indian government needs to spend about 6% of its annual budget on education. In all these surveys, the one thing that they found to be true consistently has been that the government has fallen short. The maximum money that has ever been spent on education was 4.4%. They've never even reached the 6% goal. And since the independence, India has seen both left-leaning, right-leaning, nationalistic parties and whatnot, but no one has really addressed this issue. This really bad educational system, combined with the poverty that exists within the country, the parents rather see their kids helping them make some money to put food on the table rather than sending them to these shitty schools which hold no future prospects. Now, in the last 10 to 15 years, the government has tried to fix this system. The situation has gotten better. There are better teachers. There's fewer job vacancies in these public schools. But India has a long way to catch up before it can even dream of catching up to China. At the same time, when we are talking about human capital, it is very important that we look at the condition of these kids, the malnutrition that is rampant throughout the country. Further, if you look at Global Hunger Index, India ranks 94th. Meanwhile, China, which has a very similarly sized population, had a big problem of poverty, fixed its issue about 15 years ago. If anything, it's on the top of this list. Now let's move to the next big issue, that is the involvement of women in the Indian economy. Now, a lot of the East Asian countries that grew at a rapid pace, like South Korea, which was once a third world country, is now a first world country. They prioritized educating their women, giving them jobs so that they can utilize pretty much 50% of their population that was being underutilized. Even China, the so-called direct competition that India has done tremendously well when it comes to employing women. And as a result, about 61% women in China are part of the labor force, even better than America, which stands at 56% participation. Meanwhile, in India, the percentage stands at 23%. Only 23% of the women participate in the labor force, and it is a number that has been constantly shrinking for the last 2 decades. One of the key aspects that everyone loves talking about when it comes to India is its size of the population that is young and willing to work. You see, it's not so much an advantage if only 50% of the population that should be working is working. You see, depending on how this video does, I may make another video which goes into depth as to why Indian women are slowly moving out of the labor force instead of joining it. I recently realized that I've made 63 videos breaking down different issues across the globe. I would recommend you subscribe to the channel and check out some of the other videos. It helps the channel immensely, and I would appreciate a whole bunch. Now let's move on to the third big issue, perhaps the biggest issue that India faces. You see, the biggest barrier that lies ahead of India is the lack of pro-growth policies. You see, businesses don't just want to move into a country because it's a charity. It's not. They want to move in because it offers them a competitive edge over their competitions. Now, the government of India has recognized this, and both the current government and even the last government have been spending and ramping up the development of infrastructure. There are highways being built left, right, and center. Whichever way you look, there's new infrastructure popping up across the country to connect all parts of the country to the ports to make sure business can work. Even though the government is trying to make the country a great place for businesses, the only sector that they've excelled in is the IT sector. According to the government, back in 2016, there were about 452 startups, mostly in the IT sector. By the February of 2023, or at the making of this video, there are close to 100,000 startups, all again in the IT sector. You see, India has done really good in the IT sector. However, the manufacturing has shrunk, if anything. India has mostly failed to attract foreign investment. Big companies just don't want to move into the country. If anything, some of the big companies like Harley-Davidson, Ford, and others have left the country. Remember how in the beginning of this video I said India is the perfect place where all these companies would like to move their bases? I mean, India has a big population, young population willing to work, who speaks English. And then they have great engineers being churned out by some of the best universities who, thanks to private schooling, most of the times have great education. You see, India has failed at attracting business because of its bureaucracy at the same time. There's so much red tape and rules and regulations that actually don't even make sense half the time. And they can easily be bypassed by just filling up someone's pockets, but it slows the business down. There's just so many steps and levels and hurdles to cross that a lot of the foreign manufacturers rather just go set up a shop in Vietnam or some other country that is pro-business. Another big issue for India has been the authoritarian nature of its current government. You see, it doesn't induce a lot of confidence in these foreign manufacturers when they look at the Indian government and some of its policies. Even if you put the authoritarianism to the side, just look at some of the policies. For example, in 2016, the government of India demonetized $500 and $1,000 denomination of the Indian currency. Basically, those notes and currency that you have is of no value anymore, just overnight. These are not the things that induce confidence in people or businesses. And if you look at the GDP of the country, ever since 2016, it has been on a steady decline. If anything, it has been on steady decline ever since BJP took in. It's never matched the 7.5% of the 2000s. Here's the thing to really conclude this video. The politics, the way it works in India is very different than anywhere else in the world. You see, out in the West or in most of the countries, you elect a person based on their agenda. What are they promising? What are the changes they will bring? And to some extent, people hold them accountable when those things don't come true, because every 4 to 5 years, the person goes to be re-elected. The politics in India is different. It always has been. For the last 75 years or however long the country has been independent for, every politician comes with a fan base. It's like similar to what Trump experienced. No matter what he said or what he did, people just didn't care. All they wanted was to elect him because of his fan base or people who just looked up to him. That's what India has, and currently the Prime Minister in power is Modi because his fan base is the biggest. If someone else comes around who has a bigger fan base, they get to be the next Prime Minister. It's quite simple as that. Now, Modi has done some good things for the economy, from increasing the number of startups to spending more on infrastructure. But at the same time, there have been things like the demonetization in 2016, or the handling of the pandemic and how terrible it was, or the polarization and the communal divide that exists within India has been never this high until Modi showed up. And these are the issues that have happened during his time. And these are just some of the issues that have happened during his time in power. And as a nation, people need to ask these questions. No matter how big a fanboy or fangirl you are, if you don't have a job, there's no point in voting for him. Or if the government is not providing you what you need, people should reconsider their options. You see, these 3 factors is something the government is aware of. It's clearly part of their own surveys, and it has been part of every government's surveys. These 3 factors can only be solved if the people of the country start voting and choosing people not based on their caste, their religion, or their persona, but based on what their agenda is. And every 4 years when those fuckers don't deliver, ask them. That is where India can fix its issue the most. These 3 factors are just small hurdles. If you look at China, they had the same issues and they fixed them at a very rapid pace. Same is true with many other countries. South Korea, Bangladesh, a country that was given its independence by a bigger country by the name of India, has a better growing economy than India somehow. How? Because of better policy making. That's it for this video. I will see you in a week from now. Thank you very much.